Hey, Grover Norquist here with the Leave Us Alone podcast. Leave Us Alone podcast works on the understanding that the modern conservative movement, the modern taxpayer movement, the modern center-right movement in America is a coalition of groups and individuals that simply wish to be left alone on their vote-moving issue. And one of those issues for many people is their ability to work, their ability to make a living. Their ability to be an independent contractor if they want to join a union or not join a union, to pay union dues or not pay union dues, to have their own choice of how they do their pension and benefits and so on, to give people the most flexibility, self-employed people, people with sort of jobs with a boss, people with jobs with no boss, people who are independent contractors in the United States. And that freedom is under threat by this administration, by Joe Biden, and particularly by Julie Su, who Joe Biden is trying to bring from California, where she has a history we'll discuss in terms of her anger or disagreement, or the threat she has to people being independent contractors and her leadership in that fight. She's coming to DC to be head, if she succeeds, in being head of the Labor Department. But a lot of people in Congress are saying, no, no, no. So this may not happen. So here's where we are. I have with us Rowan Saydlowski, who's the Federal Affairs Coordinator at Americans for Tax Reform, the group that I am the president of, Americans for Tax Reform. We do the No Tax Increase Pledge. And his policy areas are labor, energy, and transportation. I do want to encourage everyone to subscribe to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave a 5-star review. It really helps promote the podcast. If you're watching the live stream, please be sure to hit the thumbs up on YouTube and subscribe to the Americans for Tax Reform YouTube channel or like us on Facebook. Now, Rowan, tell us who Julie Su is and a little bit about what she's done in California. Why would she be a bad Secretary of Labor or problematic for people who care about their freedom to make a living? Rowan.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Grover. Julie Su, to start off, is a very radical nominee. She had her confirmation hearing in front of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee yesterday. The hearing did not go very well, stumbled through questions, was unable to answer certain questions, refused to make commitments on others. But she was questioned on everything from her time as a college activist to her failures as head of California's Labor and Workforce Development Agency, as you've mentioned, and to the radical policies pushed at the Department of Labor since she became Deputy Secretary of Labor under President Biden, as well as her plans for the department.
She's in the Department of Labor, but she's not the number one person now.
That's correct. She was confirmed on a thin party line vote as deputy secretary, while Secretary Marty Walsh became the full secretary. He has since resigned, and she is now acting secretary until she's able to be confirmed or not confirmed.
Okay. What is the issue with independent contractors that Julie Su was out front on in California that may become a national issue for people? That people in California may know this, but other states not. What did she do to independent contractors in California?
So while she was the head of California's Labor Department, she was a key architect and chief enforcer of a state bill known as AB 5. This implemented a vague 3-factor test known as an ABC test, basically made it much more restrictive and more difficult to self-identify as an independent contractor in the state. She wants to basically force these people who are independent contractors to either become W-2 employees or lose their work entirely. 9 in 10 freelancers in California opposed AB 5. It was so unpopular and so unworkable for the California economy that voters in the state eventually voted by a 17-point margin to create sweeping exceptions for app-based delivery drivers and rideshare drivers who otherwise would have been forced out of their contractor status under this law. Countless other exceptions have been created through the legislature because the original bill was so unworkable, to the point that the list of exceptions and industries that it no longer applies to are now longer than the original bill itself was. because it was that unworkable. Even so, countless truckers, other freelancers in the meantime were forced out of the state entirely. It's a really bad situation that Julie Sue caused.
I saw on television on the nightly news, there were people who'd saved all their life savings and bought a truck as independent contractors, and then they were told that their work is illegal. It's illegal for them to work for themselves. That you have to pay union dues if you want a job in that state.
That's exactly right. This is all to try to force more independent contractors and people who want to kind of make their own way, to force them into employment status so that they are vulnerable to unionization efforts. And that's a story that's happened too many times across California, where people have made those investments in themselves and it was taken from them.
Okay, so that the initiative in California was passed or defeated, the one that would have stopped most people from being able to be independent contractors?
It was passed by the California legislature, and shortly thereafter, voters voted on a ballot referendum for Prop 22, which made those exceptions for the app-based drivers specifically. And there have been a bunch of other fixes afterward, but there's still many people impacted by the original AB 5.
So the initiative, which in California you get enough signatures, you put a measure on the ballot. The initiative did not wipe out AB 5, which took away almost everybody's ability to be an independent contractor. The initiative only protected some people.
That is correct.
Okay, and truckers are one of the groups that was not protected.
Under that proposition, that's correct.
Okay, well, that's a disaster. Why wouldn't you run an initiative and protect everybody instead of just a few? What is it that people are looking? She's also attacking franchising. Could you explain to people what franchising is? A very American model. It's not done in a lot of other places in the world, or not done very well. Allowing people to be their own boss. You can run a McDonald's, right? Yeah, and you own the McDonald's store and you run it, but they do the advertising and they, do the promotion and so on to help you. But you're self-employed as a franchisee. Some people want to basically outlaw franchises. Would you explain the state of play? Just as there's a war on people being independent contractors, there appears to be a war on the other, on franchise.
Exactly. Franchising is a way that a lot of Americans get their first start in owning their own business and controlling their own way to make money. As you said, it's a very American thing. In California, Julie Sue championed another state bill called AB 257, or the Fast Recovery Act. This is a radical overhaul of the franchise model, specifically for the restaurant industry, where the government would be dictating wages, dictating the hours worked by the employees, and dictating all kinds of company policies in these franchise restaurants. Obviously, this would lead to massive price hikes, layoffs of workers, closures of certain franchises. Luckily, Californians, once again, have begun to reject this law. They have over 1 million signatures were gathered on a petition to introduce another ballot referendum. Californians will vote on in 2024, where they'll be able to overturn the quote unquote Fast Recovery Act, so that these extra regulations aren't placed on their businesses. And once again, Julie Sue was a champion of this model and seeks to bring that to the federal level.
Okay, so Julie Sue and the Biden administration want to outlaw franchisees and tell them you're not a small businessman, you're an employee, even though you make the decisions about how to run your business. And they also want to ban independent contractors, which would force people to pay union dues. If you wanted to be a trucker, you have to have a boss. You have to have a boss. Somehow they hate the idea of Americans working for themselves and creating their own small businesses, which might grow. And they want both franchisees to be employees, and therefore they can be unionized, and the Democrats can get money from the unions, dues, and the other. I mean, this is and independent contractors. At the federal level, what is happening if independent contractors are forced to reclassify as workers. What does that do to their tax liability? Does the government get more tax dollars out of you that way?
Yes, absolutely. So after Julie Su became Deputy Secretary of Labor, the Biden administration proposed a new rule regulating independent contractors. It didn't quite put her full ABC test into place, but it's still a more restrictive way for them to try to force people out of independent contracting and into this employment status, or again, if they can't find that employment status, then simply out of the industry. As for taxpayers, last year, ATR and the Tholos Foundation commissioned a study that looked at if Sue's ABC test were applied on a nationwide basis, which she would like, the majority of those who would be forcibly reclassified out of independent contractor status would pay higher taxes. And 96% of those who are paying those higher taxes earn below $400,000 a year.
Okay.
That adds up to about 7.5 million Americans earning below 400,000 who see their taxes raised under the Biden-Sue labor policy.
Okay, so this is in addition to an assault on forcing people to pay union dues if they don't want to, tell people they have to have a boss if they don't want to. This is also going to raise money for the government by they taxing you differently, pushing you into being an employee.
Exactly.
Okay. What is Julie Sue's background? Has she been a labor negotiator? I mean, one of the things that Secretary of Labor does is oversees elections and labor union conflict and so on. What's her experience in this area?
In terms of negotiating labor disputes, she simply doesn't have that experience. As some viewers might be aware, our supply chains are once again potentially in peril by several upcoming labor disputes. There's the Pacific Maritime Association and the International Longshore and Warehouse Union that have negotiations coming up that decides what happens at the nation's ports. And the UPS and the Teamsters have upcoming renewal of contract that they need to negotiate, and the Teamsters are threatening to strike, which would put even more of a supply chain snafu in. Secretary Marty Walsh certainly was not the ideal candidate to be Secretary of Labor either, but he at least came into office having experience with these negotiations on the ground. Julie Su has no such experience. And, we've seen enough supply chain crises as a result of our often absent Secretary of Transportation. And I think we can't afford to have an absent Secretary of Labor as well.
Okay, that doesn't look good. What are the next steps? How would she lose? I mean, the Democrats have a majority in the Senate. Don't they just get 51 votes and win? Why? This is getting attention because there's a belief by some that she could be defeated, and that would be a big black eye for the Biden administration. And it would also signal to people, independent contractors, for which there are millions and millions of Americans, and franchisees, for which there are millions of Americans who work there, can't just be crushed by the unions and the Democratic Party. That there's enough interest in protecting those people that this would be helpful.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So
why would she get beat?
Right. So the Help Committee will vote on her nomination Wednesday. With all likelihood, she will be approved on a party line basis through the committee.
It used to be called the Labor, the Help. What was? Yeah. They changed the name.
Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. It is the Labor Committee, essentially. Okay. So after that, whenever the Democrats decide to schedule it, she would move to a vote on the Senate floor. The reason that people are thinking she might not pass through there is you have several Democratic senators who have expressed, if not outright opposition, at least just that they're undecided. Usual suspects: Joe Manchin, John Tester, Kyrsten Sinema have either said that they're undecided or expressed some reservations. Other one to look at would be Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona. While he, unlike the other three, is not up for re-election next year, which means he's a little less beholden to what his constituents actually want and need, he did vote against a prior Biden labor nominee, David Weil, whose nomination ultimately went down in flames. So I think Democrats might have a tough time whipping enough votes, but we'll have to see where they end up.
Okay, so how many Democrats voting against Julie Su does it take to stop her? Is every Republican a no vote? Is every Republican a no vote?
Every Republican should be a no vote. Every Republican was a no vote on her becoming Deputy Secretary of Labor.
Wow. Okay. So she
as for
realize how radical she is.
Oh, absolutely.
And how do you get one or two or three? How many Democrat votes do we need to join the Republicans to stop her from becoming Labor Secretary?
So it is a 51-49 Senate. So if you assume everyone is lockstep, but 2 Democrats change sides, believe that is enough so that Kamala Harris can't break the tie and let her in anyway. It is complicated further because you still have the absence of Senator Feinstein. So with that absence, it might be even easier to stop, but we'd have to see how it plays out.
Okay. Well, thank you for bringing that up. Want to have some final thoughts here, and that's just that here's an opportunity for people to contact their senators and remind them the importance of defeating Julie Su because of what she has done in the past to attack independent contractors who have the right to be independent contractors. She wants to force them to pay union dues, force them to have a boss, not allow them, make it illegal for them to be self-employed. Somebody who saves that money to buy a truck to become a trucker, and then just jerk comes in and says, no, you can't be a trucker. You have to go work for a union and pay union dues. And, taking away people's freedom to work is outrageous and unacceptable and un-American. So thank you, everybody, for joining us on this podcast of Leave Us Alone, talking about your rights as a citizen to do the kind of work you want under the structure you want, not something that the government thinks up or some character named Julie Su comes and says, I'm the boss and everybody has to pay dues to my favorite charity and give money to the Democratic Party through the unions. And you have to have a boss. You have to have a boss because she's bossy. Thank you very much. And appreciate your being with us, Rowan. And good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.